Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to another Wedding Online Sports Economics Seminar, 165th. And we have Vincenzo Alfano, who's presented previously in the series, and so it's great to have Vincenzo back again. Vincenzo's talk will be on From Colonial Empires to Umpires, an investigation on the role of colonial legacy in attitudes towards subordinates. Just before he gets going, the usual reminder, if you've got questions during the talk, probably keep them for clarification during Vincenzo's talk, and they will have time. We'll have 30 minutes for Q&A at the end for any discussions that come up. The other thing is if you do struggle to access the chat here, which is quite a common thing since Teams can be quite variable in its experience for people, there is a WhatsApp group that has been created where a lot of people are, and if you want to join that, you're welcome to. As I mentioned last week, there does tend to be a little bit of distraction, talk about other sports and other events taking place, sporting events. But if you want to be in that WhatsApp group, please do send me an email with your phone number and I can add you to that group. And then you can ask questions during the sessions if you're not normally able to access the chat. So that is all from me. Vincenzo, all yours.
Thank you very much once again for this occasion. It's always a pleasure to join you. As any good economist, I am not very good at counting, but if I am correct, this is the fourth time I have the honor to be presenting among you, and it's really always a pleasure. Today, I am presenting you a work in progress I have with my colleague Massimo Guarino from the Italian Ministry of Culture, which we entitled From Colonial Empires to Umpires, an investigation into the role of colonial legacy and attitudes towards subordinates. This is still a work in progress, so any comment, critics, and possibility to make it better, it's very, very welcome. So it's pretty standard what I'm going to present you. Let me pitch for you the basic idea behind the paper. So colonization is a very important phenomenon in mankind. If we define it as the process of establishing foreign control over target territories and people, we quickly realized that it's a phenomenon that shaped a lot of modern history and contemporary time. It has a big influence. Why? Well, because of course it shapes institutions, the languages spoken in the countries, and so in final analysis, the whole culture of people that got colonized. So a lot of aspect of contemporary country depends on their history and particularly or the colonial history for a big part of the countries. As I am sure you all know, this is a phenomenon that was mainly played by European power that lasted for around 500 years. So between the discovery of Americas to the Second World War. There are in the literature debates of when colonialism really finished or if it really finished, but this is beyond the scope of this paper. So let's just stop it for that aspect. Now, given that colonialism has shaped the current culture of a lot of countries, it's not hard to assume that it still nowadays brings a relevance. From a very general perspective, the question we are going to try to answer with our analysis is if the relationship between people from former colonizer and formerly colonized countries is unique in some aspect. So if we look at anecdotal evidence and just barely common sense, it seems that it could be the case because of these important ties that colonial legacy brings with it. In particular, in this research, we want to study if there are some specificities when there is an asymmetric power dynamic in place. So, in other words, do people from countries that have been colonized treat people from their former colonial power in a different way from other people, and vice versa? Do people from former colonial powers have a different attitude toward people's belonging to a former colony of their nation? Is this relationship different when an asymmetric power dynamic is in place? Of course, it's very complex to answer to this research question with data. Why? Because it's not easy to find a situation in which we have this asymmetric power dynamic in place with people with both common colonial history and not. In that sense, the sport venue comes us to help, because it's a deterritorialized context that in its international competitions offer us a good source of data to study this question. It has already been suggested by many sociologists and economists that sport can proxy political conflict, and of course, there are asymmetric power relationships in sport, which are the one between the referee and the players. So, a long literature that I'm not going to bore you with, but it's available if you are interested, that defines sport as a proxy for war. Sport has been defined as a prolonged war, a war without weapons, and many sports fans in analogies between sport itself and war. Moreover, it's very important the role played by sport in building national identity. For some authors, sports plays the role in societies that are at peace that wars play to build a national identity during war times. And if maybe some of you remember that in a previous talk, I had the chance to present a work which shares some commonalities with this one, which was about the relationship between religion and violence in sport. So using a similar data set and exploiting once again this deterritorialized context that the Soccer World Cup offers us to study the influence of religion on the player's attitude. I don't have to highlight to you how predominant the role of a referee during a soccer game is. The football pitch is ruled by the referee, that is the judge of final instance. There is no higher authority than is over the 90 minutes of a soccer game. And so it's a supreme authoritative position. And so for sure, there is a very asymmetric relationship that it's very hard to be found in other contexts. It's for all these reasons, we believe that this can be a very good setting to try to answer our research question about specific relationship between former colonizer and colonized people in a quantitative perspective. Because to find data good to answer this question in another setting is possibly an impossible challenge. It has been already suggested that sports offer a good setting which can be defined as quasi-experimental to answer to this kind of question. Why? Well, because it is a setting in which data are controlled. So we have very good data because we are sure that what we observe is what already happened. And there are agents that very often represent peak performances in their own discipline. If we look at international important competition that are doing a game in which a lot of stakes are in honor, pride, money, possibility to have a better career, and so on. So in other terms, sport competition produce, according to this author, very clean and well-controlled data. When a lot of possible noise in the data is already eliminated by the process itself. In other words, sports are winner-take-all scenarios where we have a a lot of stakes at play, and the agents are very much incentivized to play at the best of their possibilities, creating a very good experimental setting, which can be considered very much better than using students to role play a CEO or other important actors in lack of real data about that. So we believe, for all this reason, that these data are a very good occasion to exploit the process that generates this data to study the relationship between formerly colonizing and formerly colonized people in a controlled setting where an asymmetric power dynamic is in place. So what do we do in more formal terms? Well, we study the impact of historical colonial status on the decision to issue cards of the referee. So we try to estimate this equation where on the left-handed side we have the card issue if by during each match toward each team in each single year of the World Cup, controlling, for a number of matrices. More precisely, on the left-hand side, we have our dependent variable, which is a measure of the referee severity in each match M with against while refereeing the team high in time t, and then a matrix of controls. The first one, matrix X, is composed by variables that vary across each team I and each year of the World Cup T. These variables are HSOC, which is the number of years that passed since the first official game played by this national team. This is a measure of how historical soccer is in the country, and so how long the soccer tradition is for this specific football team. It has been suggested in other papers that this measure is better than FIFA ranking to assess the overall goodness of the team because it has less spurious influence. We can talk about detail later if you want. A dummy, the host that identifies if the national team is hosting the competition or not. Another dummy, the win, that identifies if the national team is the one who is going to win the competition in that year or not. A match, which is a matrix 0-1, discriminating for how many matches this specific team played in this edition of the World Cup. So all in all these variables are measures on different dimensions of how good the team is, because of its history, because of having the advantage of hosting the competition, because being the winner of the competition, or because playing more games than the other, because assuming that the more games you play in a knocked out competition as the FIFA World Cup is after the initial stage, the better you are. Then we have the variable of crucial interest from this work, which is decall, which is another dummy assuming the value of 1 if the referee comes from a former colonized or in other estimation from a former colonized country. But we are going to see it better later on in the estimates. Then a matrix Z that basically controls for the number of teams participating in the competition. We have all the matches for the FIFA World Cup since the 1966 competition, which is the first one where we have data about yellow and red card, because unfortunately for the edition before, we do not have this granularity of data for yellow cards in each match. And so the number of teams playing the competition changed, so it changed its length, and it was important to control for that. And then the matrix W that basically controls for the characteristic of the opponent in the match. So how many cards the other team got, because it takes two to dance tango. So often you get cards because even the other team is playing a grudge match, and so it's important to control for this dynamic. Then we have a dummy for historical rivals, in which we expect the match to be more heated, and so with more cards. And so there are, for instance, Brazil and Argentina, Italy and France, and teams which are considered historical rivals for their history. And then dummies for semi-final stage and the final stage, in which, of course, there is more at stake, and so we may expect stronger agonism and so more cards. We can come back on this later if something is not clear in the looking at the results, when maybe it's easier. The basic idea of this equation is to control for all the possible relevant determinants of the number of cards that the referee issues, and in that way to measure its attitude when he rules a former colonized or a former colonizer country with the respect of all the other games that he does. So we expect to measure in the coefficient, the beta of the D-col, the dummy for colonized variable, the magnitude of the impact of this colonial legacy on the number of cards. We operationalize the number of cards in three different ways. So with a simple sum of yellow cards, second yellow cards, and red cards, and also making it in a nonlinear way, because of course red cards and second yellow cards can be an expression of higher severity because they imply kicking out a player for the game. So it can be weighted in many different ways. We did it in these three ways to see what happens. So using giving a 2 times weight to the red cards, or also giving twice the weight to the second yellow cards and the square weight to the red cards. All the results are equivalent with this operationalization. If you have something else in mind, we can discuss. And so those are the results estimating the equation we discussed with a Poisson estimator. So looking at the three columns, I don't know if you can see my pointer. Can you?
So. No.
Okay, if we look at the ref colonizer row, you see that we have three different operationalization of this dummy for colonizer. So in these three columns, the referee comes from a country that when the referee comes from a country that colonized one of the team he was ruling, the dummy is equal to 1, and we have it in three different specifications. The first one, which is the first column, it's 1, whatever the length of this colonization. So even, for instance, a very short colonization, such as the one of Italy in Ethiopia, give a value of 1 for this referee. The second one just takes in consideration referee that have been that comes from a country that has been colonized, one of the team, for a short time. And finally, in the third column, we have the opposite. So only the referees that comes from a country who was a colonizer, one of the team playing for a long time. This comes from the GOCP differentiation that gives us this data about which country have colonized for a short or for a long time other countries. As you can see, there is a positive and statistically very significant effect of the referee coming from a colonizer country, but only when it is for a long time. It loses statistical significance when it comes from a country that colonized for a short time the team who is playing. This is a first result that may suggest that referee coming from a colonizer country have an harsher attitude towards teams that are former colonies or they know. If we look at this other table, we have the opposite. So we look what happens when the referee comes from a colonized country. So he comes from a country that in the past was colonized from one of the countries are playing the match. In that case, as you may see, we did the same thing. So all the colonized referees, only the ones that were colonized for a short time and only the ones that were colonized for a long time. In that case, as you may see, there is no effect. There is no statistical significant effect. So apparently, while we found some effect of being more strict for a referee that comes from a colonizer country when he rules a former colony, we do not have the reciprocal effect when the referee is comes from a colonized country. Now, one simple way, alternative way, mechanism that could explain this result is the possibility of having a shared language. Because, of course, as we have seen, former colonies and former colonizer very often share a language. So it could be the case that the referee is harsher just because he can understand the insults or whatever else the player can tell to him. So what we did as a robustness check is to see what happens when referee and one of and the team share an official language. So in this case, the dummy assumes the value of 1 if there is a shared language between referee and the team playing. As you may see, there is no statistical significant effect in that case on the number of cards. So it seems that these results cannot be just explained by a commonality in the languages spoken. Summarizing the results, we have negative coefficient by the historic of soccer in the country and the dummy that he assumes the values of 1 for the winner of the World Cup. And so this suggests that the best team, both in terms of football tradition and in terms of winning the edition of the World Cup, gets less card on average. There is no effect on the number of cards that are taken by the team who is hosting the competition. So this suggests that the usual home effect that is found in many papers that focus on national leagues is very much diluted in the World Cup. And this can be easily explained by the fact that the attendance is more often international public rather than domestic public. And so the referee are not pressured in a way that it happens in domestic league. I think that James has a paper on this using the COVID as a treatment. So also the number of match played and the semi-final has no effect on the card, suggesting that our variable counting the footballing tradition does a good job in getting the quality of the team regardless of the length of the World Cup. On the other hand, losing the match, playing against an historical rival, and the number of cards issues against the other team, other than playing the final, are all variables that exhibit a positive and statistical significant sign, suggesting that these are phenomenon correlated with getting more cards. and so with an increase in the antagonism in this very important occasion. As we have seen, there is a positive and statistical significant effect both for the operationalization of colony as referee colonizer and long-time referee colonizer, while there is not for short-time referee colonizer. These can be interpreted as the fact that a referee judging a national team from a country that his own country colonized in the past is stricter toward this player, and so has a more severe attitude when compared to matches where this fact is not present. And the lack of significance of the short-time dummy suggests that in the subsample composed by only short-time colonizer, this is not present. So you need some time to have this effect. You need the colonization to last some time to have this effect make sense. Of course, looking at the reverse relationship, so when the referee comes from a colonized country, there is no effect. So these kind of referee are not harsher nor more lenient towards the teams that used to colonize their own country. So if one accepts the external validity of these findings, which of course is a huge if, because this is a result derived from data from the World Cup and from an equation that should control for all the possible reasons to issue a card, which is not granted. So caution is suggested in extending this kind of empirical finding to other, but we could say that people from formerly colonizing country have a stricter attitude towards people from their country's former colony, while the opposite is not true. In other terms, our analysis suggests that referees from formerly colonizing country tend to issue a higher number of cards to teams representing nations that were once under their own country colonial rules. So post-colonial power dynamic can be in place when there is a superordinate decision in an asymmetric power dynamic, and this extrinsicate in being stricter with people from their country historical colonies. This is true only for long-time colonization and while considering together long and short time, but not if looking just at short-time colonization. And so the main result is that these referees have a stricter demeanor towards team representing their former colony, while the opposite is not true. With all the limits of this analysis and the idea that what we observed comes from a number of soccer matches and not real-world scenarios, this finding can be a first results in looking what happens in asymmetric power dynamics. And so when the superordinate is not just a referee, but possibly also a manager, a judge of a card, a CEO in a multinational company, or more in general, someone that may have an important impact on the life of the subordinate. Thank you very much for your attention. I think I have been in time.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo. Very much in time. And we've got loads of time for Q&A. And Steve has got his hand up already. So Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Vincenzo. This is a really interesting talk that I think has lots of implications in a number of areas. I have a comment and a question. A comment, which is really a suggestion for others to do work I would find valuable, is to take this methodology and replicate it for cricket. And it strikes me that one of the reasons that would be interesting is not only do you have generally the language similarity, so we take out that factor, but also because cricket now uses review systems so that you could not only examine discretionary things like the equivalent of a red card or yellow card, but you could also examine calls that are subject to video review and see whether that changes the effect when a referee knows that their initial call is potentially subject to review. The second question for you, which goes far beyond the point of your talk, but goes to potential social science review of something I've been working on with a sports philosopher, which is, to me, to what extent do your findings suggest significant cognitive bias on the part of referees in issuing red cards and yellow cards, which are inherently discretionary? There's no way you could change the rules to not make them discretionary. And if it does suggest a significant bias, what does that suggest about the social norm in football that gives the referees huge discretion for things that do not have to be discretionary? So what I mean by that is, I'm a law professor, not an economist, so I'm thinking about rules and standards. In the area of a red card, it is inherent, was the offense so bad that it warrants a red card? There's no way you can write a rule about that. On the other hand, there is a rule in the rule book that says that defenders are not allowed to grab the shirts of an offensive player. And there is a rule in the rule book that says any foul committed in the penalty box is a penalty. And yet there is not a corner kick in football that does not go on where there is not a technical violation of that rule, because the social norm has been created that referees are allowed to exercise their discretion to determine when a defender grabbing a shirt or otherwise restraining the offensive player during a corner kick is sufficiently bad to warrant a penalty. And one of the things I've been examining with a philosopher is that grant of discretion to a referee valid? And I wonder if you think your work or similar works like it on bias contributes to that discussion of how much we should grant discretion to referees.
Do you prefer that I reply, or do you want to gather some question before, James?
No,
it's the same for me.
We'll go person by person. So you want to
So
speak first.
Thank you so much for this suggestion about cricket. I know next to nothing about cricket, but I will look into it. It looks very promising and interesting, and I would love to be able to expand this other than football. About the bias, so I agree with you that there is a certain discretion into the decision a referee can take, especially in soccer. And maybe we also have some national bias, in the sense that, for instance, in the UK, what is considered alleged contact is usually harder than what in Italy would be considered acceptable. So, and when that's why it's very interesting to look at international competition, because you have different styles of refereeing together and coming at the same time. The objective of my analysis is exactly to look at a bias due to this historical legacy. So it fits very much your idea, of course, which is from a legal perspective, so much different from mine. But yes, the idea. Then, if my analysis manage to measure this bias, it's another question. I mean, this is the objective of my empirical analysis. But of course, there are a lot of shortcomings and a lot of things that could be done in different ways, having different results. So I am not so I do not have a big sufficient ego to tell you that my analysis exactly highlights the bias that you are looking for, but definitely this is the objective of the analysis. Then, of course, people better than me in statistical and econometric analysis can find a number of ways for which my numbers might be wrong. And so my result could not highlight the bias in the way you mean to. But ideally, yes, I am trying to measure exactly the bias that you look for, which is due to this small discretionality of the referee that on, I think I have something like 1,526 matches played. So on average, I see the effect when there is this dynamic in play. I don't know if I answered to your question. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Vincenzo. Next up is Pete.
I have a couple questions. The first is an econometrics question. You ran 3 separate regressions. The first one with all colonized countries, and then you had a second one, and that's one I had the concern with. Only the short.
No, sorry. I have not been clear enough, but the sample, it's the same. What it changes is how I built the dummy.
Yeah, right. But the second dummy is coded just as the small, right? So
The short.
In some sense, yeah. So in that sense, the long ones were also coded as 0.
Yes.
There's where my concern is, because the excluded category includes both
Yes.
never colonized and always. So I think it would be better to shorten it just to 2 equations and include the short and the long in the same equation. And then what you would get is the better feel. The reason you're getting an insignificant one is because of the excluded category. Does that make sense?
Yes, if I understood you correctly, you are saying that with that dummy, I have as an excluding both long-term colonizer and not colonizing at all. And
Right.
this is a problem because, I mean, I am trying to grasp the effect of a short colonizing history.
When you separate the 2 into 2 equations, when you have the short colonizer, the excluded category includes both never colonized or long colonized. And so you're going to get an insignificant result because of that.
No, I see this, but okay.
Well, just try it. See if you can put the 2
Yes.
together, and then the excluded category. And then the second is you really only reported the significance in terms of statistical significance. I would always like to have that converted into a magnitude, exactly how much. And I know you can do that with the Poisson. So you might want to know exactly how many red cards. I think it works out as a percentage, but I think that would be very useful.
Okay, so, yes, the problem of that is that the dependent variable, it's 3 different kind of cards. So I can tell you exactly the impact on these, but I cannot split it in yellow, second yellow, and red cards.
That's very true. But I think what you could say is they would get this many more cards.
Yeah, on average.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that helps.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Pete. Next, we've got Massimiliano. You're on mute.
I'm sorry, you should be able to hear me now.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you, Vincenzo. I think that was a brilliant presentation and really interesting work. So my question is about one of the covariates, because I was thinking that there might be a concern with losing the game. So certainly losing the game makes it more likely to get cards, but it's also true that well, the relationship works also the other way around. So basically, if you get more cards, you're more likely to lose the game, which might raise concerns of endogeneity. So probably you could just think of instruments to sort out this problem.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we ran a number of attempts removing and adding variable to see what happens, because another problem of endogeneity, as you were saying, is the number of cards that the other team gets, because there is this kind of retaliation that increases. So definitely, yes, this is a thing to look into. On average, yes, you're right, because all the other variables suggest that the best team gets less card, both in terms of who wins the competition and who is better. So yes, losing can be correlated to the number of cards, even to unlinearly. But yes, thank you. I will look better into that.
Wonderful.
Great. Thanks, Massimiliano. And our next question is from Yuri.
You're
mute
mute.
as well.
Oh yeah, sorry. Hi Vincenzo. Thank you very much for your talk. Really, really impressive findings. And my question is on the robustness checks. So you run one on the language dummy, whether the former colonizer country and the colonized country share the same language. But my question would be, so have you tried looking at just creating a dummy just being from the global north versus the global south in a way? Because there are some countries in Europe that have never had the opportunity to colonize, and based on that, there must be. My second question is: have you noticed um, any rules in play by FIFA that are automatically sort of trying to prevent such situations where a country that is somehow tied from the colonial past is either the refereeing side or the subordinate side in your specification? Yeah, thank you.
So starting from your second question, to the best of my knowledge, there is no rules forbidding it, and there are many occasions in which it happens. That's why I have the dummy, because otherwise it would be impossible. The rules forbids, of course, for a referee to be of the same nationality of one of the team playing, but this is another story. Then I haven't tried this thing of the. Let me clarify something before. The shared language is not just for colonies. This dummy assumes the values of 1 when the referee and the team playing share the language, whatever,
Right.
if they have
Right,
a colonial past or not.
Yeah, so they
for
can both be
instance,
colonies. Yeah, okay.
Argentina and Peru share the same language, and they do not have a colonial past. So because it was to look into this, commonality of understanding each other, and especially insults towards the referee that may lead to cards. So I haven't tried these global north, global south things you were suggesting. I am not sure I really can with the data we have, but because your idea is that it can be a power dynamic that affects richer and poorer countries rather than former colonists and former colonizer. It can be yes, this. I think it's another research, but it's an interesting one. So I can look into it. So like GDP per capita between the referee and the team, how it affects the decision, the difference between.
Yeah, for instance, that could be a proxy, or just a simple: was this country ever colonized by anyone in the past X number of years? How recent is your colonial past? Things of that sort. But thank you for addressing my question.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Thanks, Yogi. And then we have Stefan.
Hi, Vincenzo.
Hello.
Hi. As other people said, this is a really great paper. It's really wonderful to see this kind of question being people using sports data to address these kind of questions. So it's really great. So I have a few comments, which I think one which follows on a little bit from what Georgi said is that surely almost every single colonizer is a European nation. I guess there could be some others, but almost, colonialism was a European disease, if you want. And therefore, I think it might well be something to do, I wonder if as a robustness check, you could just put in whether it's a European referee dummy, because we Europeans, we're kind of noted for our arrogance, right? I mean, do we think anybody is a match for us? Probably not. And being English, we're even worse. I mean, how many? You could just put a dummy for English referees who, I mean, we do have a significant reputation here. So I wonder if you could check some of these robustness things. The other thing I was thinking about this was, as I understand it, what you're looking at is the referee and the cards for each team. But there's also the issue of the opponent, right? So is a European or a colonizer more likely to give yellow cards to a colonized nation if they're playing another colonizer, or if they're playing another a colonized nation? So it might well be that there is a three-way interaction to consider here, which might be worth considering. Another thing I was wondering was about dissent. So again, thinking about this again, coming from a big colonizing nation, I'm used to people talking about this people from colonized nations having some resentment. Strangely, I don't know why they resent being colonized, but then there you are, they do. So I can imagine, an Australian team being refereed by an Englishman. The Australians might have something to say to the Englishman, which might, particularly if they don't like the decision, they might say something which would indicate that they don't have a great deal of respect for the English to begin with, and which might actually affect whether you're getting cards or not. So then the English stuffy referee might give a card for dissent. So that's something to consider, I think. I also wondered about why you're estimating these effects separately. It looked to me like they were the same data sets, but two regressions. So I wasn't sure why you didn't have the colonized referee country regression with this, and vice versa, all estimated in the same regression. And just two small other comments. Firstly, on the cricket, you should, for your references, I mean, there is a big literature on umpiring in cricket. Pretty much every international game of cricket is between a colonizing nation, the English, and the colonized nation, because only the former colonies particularly play, apart from Afghanistan, which is the one interesting one. The British never managed to conquer. But in cricket, they had, for a long time, the home team would provide the umpires. And this led to all sorts of problems, which are well documented, and which you might want to, again, just for your footnotes and references, I think that would be useful. And finally, just you talked about the relationship between war and sport. I think the original quotation you want to use is George Orwell, who described it, sport as war minus the shooting.
So thank you very much, Stefan, for all the suggestion. I love to add this quote to a paper, to make it rounder. So maybe I wasn't clear enough about the building of the dummy variable, but the thing is, it's not equal to 1 if the referee comes from a colonizer country and that's it. It's equal to 1 if the referee comes from a colonizer country and it's refereeing a former colony of this country. So it's equal to 1 if a British referee referees Australia. It's not equal to 1 if a British referee referees Italy. So we are not just looking if the referee comes from a country with a colonial legacy or past. We are looking at the specific relationship between the national team and the referee nationality. That's why you need 6 different regression, because you cannot put all the dummy together. Otherwise, you would have a multicollinearity issue, because everyone is either a former colonizer or comes from a colonized country, and so you cannot estimate the model. You would have a dummy trap, basically. And I hope this answers your first part. Maybe I didn't understand correctly your question, but about the multiple regression, because I don't see another way to do it empirically. Maybe there is, but if there is, just tell me so that I can try also this way. Coming to the alternative mechanism of the referee, this is definitely something we should add. I think your idea is brilliant. If I understood correctly, it could be in some cases that it's not the referee that it's harsher. It's the players that are more vulgar, more offensive towards a referee that comes from that is a former colonizer. So definitely this is a mechanism we didn't talk about, and it deserves for sure an hypothesis into it. Of course, we cannot really empirically test for it because we don't really know if it's in place, but it's definitely worth it to be cited into the paper. So thank you. This is definitely a possibility. And I think that's all for the cricket. Yes, I really have no idea how to play cricket, but I think that your point is very important. I think we should look into it, because this kind of analysis makes sense if you have matches where there are no colonial legacies, which you can use as a counterfactual. But if there is always a colonial legacy, of course, you cannot do the analysis in this way. So yes, your point, it's very much on the spot, and we should look into it before gathering cricket data.
Yeah, I wonder if you had a thought about the European point, though. I mean, aren't all the colonizers, essentially all the colonizers are European? So if you
there
just
is
ran
the
this
US
regression,
in our analysis, in our data set, there are the US, who are colonizer of Cuba for a short time, of Guam, if I remember correctly. And
that's not a lot of observations.
Russia, I don't know if you consider it Europe or not. You know, there is a debate about where Europe ends, but Russia is another former colonizer. But yes, the vast majority, of course, are European, but I don't think there is much we can do in that sense, because colonialism was mostly a European phenomenon. So.
Well, but you could run a robustness check to see if instead of being between a colonizer and a colonized nation, the dummy variable could be a European and a non-European nation. And do you get the same effect? So is it just something about Europe, or is it really something about colonialism? So, you know, if you, which are the non-colonial European nations?
Denmark,
Actually,
Sweden.
it's hard to think of who could we name as being not being colonial. Maybe Croatia, I suppose. You know, but Albania. But that would then be whether you would then see whether it's just because it could just be a European thing. Because remember, football comes from Europe, right? Soccer comes from Europe. So there's this whole thing about, well, is it the Europeans who who produced the game and feeling superior to the rest of the world because it's our game, which again, any English person will produces that effect in squared, right?
Thank you. This sounds a great robustness check.
Great. Thanks, Stefan. Georgi has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So just to follow up on that, because that actually raises an interesting point, Vincenzo. On I just looked it up. There was a Slovenian referee at the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Well, Slovenia by itself is not considered a colonizer, I would assume, in your sample. But prior to being independent, a long time ago, it used to be part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That was definitely a colonizer. So how would you treat countries in Europe itself? Because again, to your point and to Stefan's point, most of the countries that are deemed to be, dummy one as a colonizer are European nations. So how would that affect the countries that come from maybe former empires, that come from a colonizer legacy? Because I mean, Albania for some time used to be part of the Ottoman Empire. That was so, like, how far back, where do you draw the line? Because technically Albania can be considered, with very, very long historic past, a part of the colonizer nation, if you will.
Yes. So thank you for this point. The table we use, which is in the paper, is this one that we got from the CEO CEPI dataset. So the basic idea is that colonizer, I mean, of course, there is the problem that you highlight, that some that borders change over time. So what is a country? And this is a philosophical question. But our main, the mechanism that we imagine is one of vindication or anyone unsettling feelings for a past. So what we consider a colonizer is the country that keeps the name. So Slovenia, Slovakia are not colonizers just because they were not existing. They were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria is considered the colonizer. I don't know if it makes sense to you. I see your point, but anecdotally, I don't think that Slovak feels or are considered colonizer on average. Then, of course, it might be the case that some Slovaks feels to have the long inheritance of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and having, but I wouldn't know how to test this hypothesis, because then it becomes very much a matter of how the referee feels.
Yeah, could I just quickly follow up on the table that you were showing? Because you're showing all the so where do you get the summary of colonizers? Do you code it by yourself
No,
from
I
different
told you it's
sources?
a data set. It's named GeoSepi. No. I wouldn't have the skills to code it by myself.
Well, because I mean, it's missing something obvious. Like, for instance, Turkey is an exploiter of Bulgaria, but if we're in the B's, Bosnia and Herzegovina is nowhere to be found. So I just have questions on that. How Czech was it in that regard?
Yeah, I can refer you to the original dataset. I don't know if Bosnia can be considered a colony of Bulgaria or of Serbia. It's
No, of Turkey, of the Ottoman Empire, because Bulgaria, colonizer, exploiter is Turkey. BGR, I assume, is Bulgaria.
Yeah, I see. I see your point, and I can refer you to the original dataset, but I don't think there is much can be done from an empirical perspective to code what you said, because either you really have the skills to do it yourself, which is not at all my set of skills, because you need to be an expert of history of a long time, and then I assume that it's somehow debatable. That's why we took the way of using someone else that was in the literature rather than coding it ourselves. But I see your point. I mean, it's a legit critique to have a different idea of which one were colonizer and colonizing, and yes, of course, it's a potential problem.
Great, thanks, Georgi. Now on my screen, the next person is meeting guest, but I think is it Clay?
Yes, I think so. I'm
Great.
sorry.
Okay, go ahead, meeting guest.
Yeah, I have a question related to, again, this complexity of colonizer, and I'm not by any means an expert, but I saw on the list that Argentina was listed as colonized by Spain, which they were, but Argentina also saw a lot of Italian immigration, so much so that like half of all of the Argentine population claim Italian ancestry. So I keep thinking about how a Spanish ref would referee an Argentine team versus an Italian referee, because Italy has a lot of cultural tie and maybe some cultural bias there. I don't know if you would call that colonialism, but that could be also an additional extension or something else as well to look at, not just sort of the colonization or who holds the territory, but who settles it and immigrates to it as well.
So if I understood correctly, your point is that Italy has somehow colonized Argentina by sending their tons of migration for hundreds of years, which is true, of course. But then it becomes very complex to put the threshold of because your example with Italy and Argentina, it's clear and it's brilliant. But then there are a lot of more shady cases. So where do you put the threshold? And but yes, it's interesting. Then by being married with an Argentinian woman and being Italian myself, I can confirm you that Argentinian have very different feelings on average towards Spanish people and Italians. But I see your point, and it's interesting. Our idea was more to try to grasp this legacy in terms of either feeling linked to the former colonial power or feeling regretful, having a sense of vendetta towards them. Your idea, it's very interesting. I think it's a different research question, and I wonder if there is a way to measure this proximity that would be very interesting. So thank you for this idea. I think it's brilliant. It's the problem of all these brilliant ideas that when it comes to data and numbers, it's hard to put them into the tables because it's so interesting, all these, shades of gray, and then we have to make it flat on our data set, which is a shame.
Great. Thanks, Clay. Thanks, Vincenzo. We've still got a little bit of time, so if there are any more questions and comments people have. One small thing I wondered, Vincenzo, based on Steve's first question, actually, was obviously we have VAR in football, and that ought to have moderated perhaps some of the red cards, since VAR can consider red cards. I don't know whether your data set covers the period over which we've been moving towards more VAR interventions in the game, and whether you could look at that as a moderating force on this effect.
Sorry, I'm not sure I got your question. The second yellow card?
Basically just asking you if you think VAR might have had an effect.
The VAR, sorry. Yes, this was because we call it VAR in Italian, so it wasn't the video assistant referee, right?
Yeah.
So yes, That's what came up to my mind with the first comment about the cricket and the review of the fall. It's very interesting. The big problem for my kind of analysis is that we do not have enough data to do that, because it's a very recent thing. You consider that to get these 1,500 observation, we go back to the first World Cup for which we have full data on the cars, which is 1966.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
because it's not that often that you have this colonial referee that rules a team. So you miss a lot of, you need a huge data set to have an interesting number of this occasion. But yes, in future, this can be a great addition to see what happens when you take a decision and then there is the VAR if you change your decision based on the colonial legacy. But I think right now we would have something like 4 data points for that. So it's not barely enough to make a quantitative analysis.
Yeah, true.
You know better than me probably, but I think the VAR is just since 2 edition, no, of the European.
The Euros probably, yes. Well, I thought it probably came in 2021, wouldn't it? Yeah.
So you know, not enough
yeah.
data, but yes, very interesting potential in future.
Another point that springs to mind again is actually I think it's a Peter Dawson paper, isn't it, where they look at the Champions League matches, but it's referees and how referees respond to players that are from their country versus players from other countries. And presumably you could look at this colonized effect at domestic football level. And when you look at the referee in a domestic game rather than in an international game, and players from colonized countries or colonizer countries, perhaps.
Yes, it's a bit more complex because you need to have data about each player nationality, and then also on the assumption level, you know, it's different when you play the national team of the. You should assume that the referee knows about the nationality and punish it, rather than when it's the national. All these things are easier, you know. To, but yes, it's something. If one has a nice data set, one can try to see what happens.
Yeah. Stefan's got his hand up again.
Yeah, Vincenzo, I think one thing, I think the difficult question but I think one that you really probably do need to address ultimately in this paper is, why on earth would this effect exist? I mean, what's your theory? The referee, what does he despises the colonial nation because they are inferior, or he resents the colonial nation, the colonized nation, because they've now not colonized anymore? I mean, if you're going to say this is bias, there must be a reason for it, and it must be something that is attributable to some rationale, some reason for prejudice, which is not obvious in a way, right?
We link the mechanism in the base of it on average to paternalism. So you are stricter because you have this paternalistic feeling towards these older. And there is a literature on court judges judging people from former colonies and finding a similar effect. So, of course, I mean, I'm not saying that this is true for each and any people from a former colonizer country. But, you know, when you look at long data, you can find something that is true on average.
Okay, but I mean, yeah, paternalism might work, but I'd still have to. I mean, so I'm a father. I would claim that I'm indulgent towards my children. I let them. I give them an easier time than I would give to someone who wasn't my children. So I know that argument can go both ways, but you know, in some sense, it's not obvious that mechanism would apply here. You might. I mean, I suppose it depends on the context, but you
Of
might
course,
be more indulgent, mightn't you?
Yeah, I mean, the indulgence is not what we find in the analysis. It would have been about, we didn't approach the analysis with an idea, a strong framework in mind. You know, we wanted to see if there was an effect, and we found this kind of effect. So reasoning a posteriori, our idea is that there is this kind of attitude towards the I say it very in a very unpolitically correct and wrong way, but let's say newly freed territories rather than towards the rest of the world, you know. And I am sure that each time you visit the US, you find a lot of things that they are doing wrong rather than, no, I'm joking, but yeah, you know, this is
always actually. Well, no, except now I'm an American, I've changed my view on this, and everything's right and everything's wrong. So there you go.
No, then of course it would be interesting to analyze different relationship, because of course the relationship between the UK and the US, it's very different from the one between France and Algeria, or but you know, this is a kind of quantitative framework in which you have this big view about the phenomenon. Then you may go for qualitative explanation of specificities that I cannot get with my framework because I do not have enough data points.
Well, I get another approach that might work, which comes to mind, is there's this I believe there's a database of every country that's ever gone to war with another country.
Yes.
And I remember this database because there's something like 200 nations in this, and Britain has attacked 195 of them at some point in its history. And maybe that would be another route to go and see whether if that data from that database, to see whether referees from aggressor nations are more likely to be aggressive referees. I mean, that might be a fact.
That's also very interesting. Yes, you have here the problem that not all the wars have the same impact in the culture. For instance, think of Falkland War, that 40 years after still has a huge momentum in Argentinian narrative. In these 40 years, UK has done several other wars which are not so much felt by many people. So it's hard to weight the relative importance of the wars if you just count them. But yes, it's interesting to find this can be a base to make something more refined, to start with this number of countries and then try to get out something more refined. The good thing about colonialism is that it's hardly something you can ignore.
If there is any good thing about colonialism.
Yeah. No, but I mean, you share the language, you share the culture in so many ways.
Well, but the aggression, the military invasion story might be good to capture the idea of resentment of the team and dissent from the team, because you know if you've got an English referee and an Irish team, they would have plenty of rich things to say about the English, right, based on the colonial history there. And so, yeah, I mean, anything where you've invaded, you've attacked, like you say, the Argentinians, they would have plenty of things to say to an English referee based on the Falklands, right?
Yes. No, this is definitely an idea that it's very worth exploring. I should look into it. Thank you.
A great paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Okay. Any other questions folk want to put to Vincenzo? In which case, we will wrap up. Thank you, Vincenzo. That was a very impressive 45 minutes of fielding questions on your paper. Really interesting paper, obviously provoking lots of interesting comments. And I look forward and wish you all the best as you develop the paper. We will return on July the 5th, which is next Friday, with Alessandro Di Mattia from Mold University College. She's presenting on the effect of a structural change in round-robin tournaments with 4 teams, evidence from beach volleyball. So look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Vincenzo. Bye-bye.